Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service, and welcome to May. It's the first, of course, and as always, we encourage you in this month and every month to stay up to date with your local weather information. Call us at 1-800-472-0391. That's the Alaska Weather Information Line. That'll give you direct access to your very latest forecast and information for your part of Alaska. You can find us online at weather.gov/Alaska, and of course, if you can't find what you're looking for there or here or on this show, no matter what, if it's got something to do with weather and what the National Weather Service is doing in Alaska, please let me know. I'm happy to serve you any way I possibly can. David.Snider@NOAA.gov is how you find me. Let's take a look at the watches, warnings, and advisories across Alaska. It is still winter time if you're in the interior, and winter weather advisories will go into effect late tomorrow night and for many locations across the interior, including Fairbanks, for slushy and wet snow at lower elevations, and more likely about 4 to 7 inches at some of the higher elevations. That could include places like the Dalton Highway. Now, we still have winter weather advisories for the North Coast, mainly due to blowing and drifting snow there, but accumulating snow may be found as far west as the upper Koyukuk and as far east as the southeastern slopes of the Brooks Range, and across the 40-mile country and the Tanana Flats, all the way out toward Denali, some of the higher passes there, and into the central interior around Tanana. So once again, slushy wet snow certainly possible at lower elevations. Fairbanks, that could mean 1 to 2 inches in town, but a little bit higher up, maybe as much as 4 to 7. So plan for some changes, especially as we go through the daytime tomorrow and onward into Friday. A winter weather advisory posted for all the areas here you see shaded in yellow at this point. Let's take a look at breakup here, and as we look at back to Tuesday's map, you'll notice that there are plenty of areas that are open across the upper Tanana and the upper Yukon. The Yukon itself is still listed as mostly ice. We hope to have a new update from Crane Johnson and the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center as we go through the daytime tomorrow. From what we're hearing around the Kuskokwim, Selena Van Breukelen, a service hydrologist now for the National Weather Service here in Anchorage, and working with the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center and the state of Alaska on River Watch, says that the Cusco is pretty much done. It has mushed out as best we can tell, and no major issues there expected with the Kuskokwim as of this afternoon. So really great news there if you're up and down the Cusco. It sounds like things are going pretty easy so far this year. So the next part, we'll be watching what the Yukon is doing, and we do have our hydrologist in charge from the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center out there around Eagle, and he is giving us reports, and we'll have an update on some of that as we go through tomorrow. You can always get the very latest information on their website, weather.gov/APRFC. Fire danger right now is growing, and as you've probably seen in some communities in the interior, including Fairbanks looking eastward, there has been some wildfire activity there, and also around South Central. We've had a fire pop up around Ninilchik just in the last week, and another fire out there around the Golcana area. So conditions are getting dry. Right before green-ups, pretty dangerous time for fire danger, and with conditions being relatively dry as far as precipitation goes, that is certainly a concern, and it is growing right now. So as always, be careful with fire. Check with your local officials if open burning is acceptable before you do it on any day of the year. And again, be fire wise in your community going forward. Let's take a look at the satellite picture. Low pressure is moving across the Alaska Peninsula there. You can see the sweeping southerly flow across the west coast, and a lot of that bright white there is indeed a lot of warm and wet air moving in. You can see a kind of a void in the clouds here, and then more of that north to south descending air across the eastern side of Alaska and the Yukon. As the main area of low pressure sits out to the west, this is driving that very warm and wet air into Alaska, and that trend should continue through the rest of the week. But some of that is going to meet up with colder air across the interior, and thus the chance of snow as we get into tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow night, and certainly on into Friday for our friends in the interior. This is a relatively dry pattern for southeast, But it does look like as we move into late Thursday night and Friday, this wave will cross the Gulf and bring a chance of rain your way. In the middle, of course, is south central and southwest, and we're already starting to see those changes shape up as we move toward the end of the week. Here's our high pressure center at the surface over the Gulf, 1,031 millibars there. Here's the cold air across the Yukon, sneaking its way in from the east across the Alcan border and across the west. Low pressure sitting across southwestern Alaska, 1,014 millibars, dragging in just a little bit of cool air. It's certainly not a cold front by any stretch of the imagination, but it does have the ability to lift that moisture up, condense it, turn it into clouds, and eventually into some rain across the area. Now, we do have some areas of fog up across the North Slope. On the other side of that front where it's cooler, we find some of that is turning into snow for the central and eastern Beaufort Seacoast, and visibility could be reduced there, and thus the winter weather advisory that's still posted. Low pressure across the Yukon Delta is slowly drifting eastward, running into a ridge of high pressure that's keeping a lot of the interior generally cloud-free tonight. But there may be some areas of fog around Prince William Sound. Points east could see some showers across the outer coast of southeast up toward Yakutat and outside of Cross Sound. On the back side of this, colder air is moving into that moisture, and with that we expect some rain and snow showers in the vicinity of the Seward Peninsula, Norton Sound out toward St. Lawrence Island, Nunivak Island, and westward you can see another wave of unsettled weather working across the western chain and the western Bering Sea. The crossed arrows, of course, mean that blowing and drifting snow is still a possibility across the North Slope. Winter weather advisories may be continued if that is the case. The front will work its way across the interior tomorrow afternoon, and as it does so, a lot of what you'll see at lower terrains will probably be rain, maybe rain mixed with snow, and the further up in elevation you go, the better chances you'll see snow fall. So once again, a winter weather advisory for late tomorrow night for many communities, for as much as 4 to 7 inches of snow in the higher terrain. Down where most folks live, probably a couple inches of slushy wet snow at best. And again, that does include the Fairbanks area as we get into late tomorrow night. Rain will move back into southeast late for Thursday night and into Friday, and as the front sweeps across south central, we expect another round of wetter weather moving through. Not terribly soaker, but certainly wetter. And on the backside of the low pressure system in the northern Bering, look for rain and snow to mix. As we get into Friday morning, a much better chance for snow to sneak its way into the interior as colder air is trailing the system. Low pressure across the northern Bering is really kind of stuck in place. 1,006 millibars there. We've got another front working in stronger southerlies across the central chain. Watch for some gales with that one, and high pressure working across the western Gulf will push another round of warmer air into south central and slowly break up the clouds, with rain continuing lightly across southeast. Here's a quick check of temperatures for your Thursday morning. 30s and 40s in southeast for south central, upper 30s to about 40 degrees for the Kenai Peninsula down to Kodiak. Bristol Bay temperatures hovering closer to 40 degrees, 29 in Nunivak Island, 36 for Nome, and single digits to teens across the Beaufort Seacoast and the Chukchi Coast. Fort Yukon 28. In the middle Tanana Valley, 30s and 40s there. High temperatures on Thursday. You can still see some pretty warm air out ahead of that weather system, so it will start as rain for places like Fairbanks. Out in the west, 40s, even 50 degrees out toward Galena, northward toward areas around Kotzebue Sound, 30s and 40s there. 20s for the North Slope. Southeast looking at temps in the lower to mid 50s with Kodiak 51, Dutch Harbor and Unalaska 46, 42 St. Paul and St. George. So the very mild weather will take us into Friday, but cooler air is setting in. And it looks like by Friday afternoon and Saturday, interior temperatures will be cold enough for snow.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And for your aviation forecast, starting tomorrow morning, IFR conditions will be fairly widespread from the west coast all the way through Kotzebue Sound, the Seward Peninsula, covering up Norton Sound, St. Lawrence Island, out towards St. Paul and St. George, and then a little more broken up as you head into the central and western chain. The eastern chain may have even greater holes, and perhaps even a slight opportunity for VFR in the morning around Dutch Harbor and Unalaska. And then widespread IFR, very heavy across the central and northern Gulf into Prince William Sound, Kodiak Island, and southwest. Now, eastern parts of the interior may start your Thursday with VFR conditions, hit and miss MVFR across the western Tanana Valley, and then into southeast with MVFR. As we go through the afternoon, you'll see some improvement across inland areas for southwest, but most of the marine areas, as well as the Seward Peninsula, the Sounds, and into Bristol Bay, will at least have MVFR and more likely IFR conditions, especially from the Kuskokwim Delta northward. For areas just outside of Bristol Bay, you may see VFR expanding in coverage. That could include a pretty good flying day for parts of the Alaska Peninsula. Look for IFR to be widespread and linger across the Gulf, Prince William Sound and into the Alaska Range, and really a large part of the Susitna and Matanuska valleys there southeast still holding on to MVFR. You'll see that flip over to IFR by Friday morning, and a lot of that will spread into the Wrangell-St. Elias region as well as the middle and upper Yukon Valley, south of the Brooks Range and then to the Chukchi Coast, and then all the way down the west coast there. Marginal conditions continue for areas inland around the Tanana Valley, south and west into the Kuskokwim. Still holding on to coastal areas of Bristol Bay, but just to the west, look for VFR conditions that could again reach as far west to Dutch Harbor and Unalaska. That trend continues for Friday afternoon. A much greater chance for VFR to spread north and west of the Alaska Range, north of Rainy Pass and to the upper Kuskokwim, with IFR holding on to the northern parts of southeast and the eastern Gulf and around the Chukchi Coast and northern Bering Sea. Here's your pass conditions now for Thursday. Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass likely holding on to marginal levels at least through your Thursday. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass look to be IFR through most of the day. Rainy Pass is probably holding at marginal. Windy Pass on the other side will likely look at IFR conditions most of your day. Isabel Pass starts at marginal levels and then heads toward IFR. And Mentasta Pass, we expect to see a VFR start, but pushing over toward marginal kind of a finish for your Thursday afternoon. Tonita Pass, we expect to see marginal levels leaning toward IFR as the day goes on, and Portage Pass IFR all the way, and Chilkoot and White Pass, at least marginal, and then looks like things change a little bit more into Friday. Freezing levels show kind of a mess on the screen today compared to previous days. You'll notice, though, that the general trend is this upside-down shape U pattern. The outside line is about 2,000 feet. The inside line as high as 8,000 to 10,000 feet across the Gulf. What does this mean? There's a lot of warm air that's pushed up over most of interior Alaska and the Gulf of Alaska out to the west. The next weather maker is already pushing its way in, and again around 2,000 feet. So icing potential follows that pattern here, and you'll notice all these levels are pretty high up there, anywhere from about 8,000 to 10,000 feet or so, before you run into that critical threshold to start to see ice growth. So that's good news. That means you've got a lot of space underneath that shouldn't give you a whole lot of trouble as far as icing potential goes anyway. Above 6,000 feet here across the central chain, 10,000 feet and higher for the Gulf Coast, and anywhere from 8,000 to 10,000 feet across the west coast for considerable moderate. Jet stream potential has our low pressure system here across the Kamchatka Peninsula and just south, driving in westerlies across the North Pacific, 130 to 150 knots. A ridge of high pressure across all of mainland Alaska and the Gulf. You can see the southerlies coming into southwest around 110 knots. The ridge builds into the Arctic and then follows the spine of the Rockies down around 140 knots there. So everyone in Alaska is experiencing the effects of this ridge. At 9,000 feet, high pressure sitting across the Gulf. You see our southwest flow coming into southwest Alaska. Light winds for the interior, generally 10 to about 20 knots. That east and southeasterly flow for the Beaufort. And at 3,000 feet, you can see a little bit of a stronger flow coming into the northern Yukon and into the Beaufort Sea coast, 20 to 40 knots. Low pressure sitting across the Yukon Delta with that onshore flow coming into the Yukon, anywhere from 25 to 35 knots. The ridge of high pressure sits across the Gulf of Alaska with a west and northwesterly flow moving into southeastern Alaska. Eastern interior locations looking at light winds generally from the south and southeast, about 10 knots or so, and across the Aleutians anywhere from 20 to about 50 knots, and that becoming more southerly with time thanks to the building low pressure system out over eastern Russia, and then northerlies making its way through the Bering Strait at this point. And far as turbulence goes, it looks like isolated moderate will be the rule for the Beaufort Sea coast all the way into the northern Arctic coast there around Utqiagvik and Wainwright. We will see a little bit of a better chance for considerable moderate across southeast below 4,000 feet, especially for central and western coast areas, and then southwest below 4,000 feet, including Kodiak.
When you think of a national park, you probably envision wide open natural spaces, undisturbed by human activity. There are indeed such places, but even in some of the most remote areas of a place like Kenai Fjords National Park in Alaska, the mark of man is present. Marine debris is a menace to the farthest reaches of our globe, and even designated national park lands are not immune. In the summer of 2009, the Resurrection Bay Conservation Alliance, a grassroots conservation organization based in Seward, Alaska, decided to do something about the marine debris fouling the beaches of Kenai Fjords National Park. Marine debris coordinator Tim Johnson had first-hand experience with the issue.
The summer before, my wife and I, Michelle, had done a paddle from Seward, sea kayak paddle from Seward to Homer. Really, our eyes were open to some areas that we didn't realize there was so much accumulation. It was very deceiving up front. You couldn't really get a feel for the extent and impact of it. You've got this nice high tide line that's quite pristine, and you really don't get a picture for the impact, the amount of debris in that area until you get behind those storm berms. You get back into the lagoons and the vegetation around those lagoons. And then you see the absolute extent back into that veg and how intertwined and enmeshed these decades of trash deposition. So we were just appalled by that and said we got to get something together on a larger scale.
The Resurrection Bay Conservation Alliance is a local nonprofit community organization, and they have been instrumental in helping the Park Service obtain funding to get larger boats to help move the debris, and they get volunteer labor and organize the work trips. And so it's really a partnership between the Park Service and the community to help get out and really get a project done that in and of itself any one group couldn't do on their own.
Most of that trash was baggable. However, there were large items, huge, piles of hauser line, for example, that we just had to hoist up onto the boat.
The volunteers didn't just bag, haul, and hoist the garbage, but also carefully recorded what types of debris were collected.
In many ways, the debris itself is a resource. Archaeologists use middens, the trash heaps, as a way of analyzing past cultures. And in one sense, marine debris is a form of a midden. It's a trash heap that left for the future would be something that people could use to analyze our culture. It may not say the best things about our culture or everything that we want, but we need to be able to document what we've done so that we can preserve that legacy, make sure that we as a society don't forget what we've been doing.
We had two larger categories of marine debris that we picked up. Commercial fishing means like, say, gill nets, large hauser lines, anything that would be associated with more of a commercial fishing scale. And then the second category was more recreational fishing and household, which would be general plastics, things like that. So we had about a 75% of the commercial fishing marine debris element, and about 25% of the recreational and household further out the bay. And we had the exact opposite the closer we got to Seward. Within the bay, it was about 25% commercial fishing versus 75% recreational fishing and household.
The trash is not just unsightly for park visitors, but also poses threats to wildlife and marine habitat.
Really one of the larger issues now that you go to this plastic that can really get into the food web and affect the food web differently than something like glass.
These substances, for instance, all these polystyrene blocks that are breaking down into all these little crumbly bits are further breaking down on a microscopic level, and how much of an impact that has, in this ecosystem is, yet to be determined, but I think it's got pretty high potential.
Well known that sea turtles will eat plastic bags floating in the water. They look like jellyfish to a sea turtle, and obviously a plastic bag doesn't go well in the digestive system of a turtle. Albatross will see small pieces of plastic floating on the surface and think they're small fish and other food sources and eat that in their stomachs, especially in some of the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. They'll find dead albatross that have starved to death with a full stomach, and it's full of pieces of plastic.
We're affecting our local areas this way, but we need to be thinking about it from more of a state and global, international scale. And most importantly, to try and focus on prevention of it coming in the first place. Because we're just going to see this continuing, to build up on our beaches unless we're able to get a little bit more of an approach on prevention on the front end.
Marine debris is really a global problem, in all the oceans, and there are many different sources. Global shipping is one. Fishing debris from commercial fishing, recreational boating activity on land, stuff blowing off land, washing down streams, people just throwing stuff on the shore.
Though the problem can seem overwhelming, Johnson remains upbeat about making a positive difference.
No, you gotta start locally. You gotta, take control of what you can do, and make something with that, and try and move on from there.
Overall, more than 9 tons of debris was removed from the beaches of Kenai Fjords National Park and transported back to Seward to be deposited in a landfill.
People gave a lot to the project in order to make it happen. That was awesome. One of the most amazing experiences I've ever had. Being able to put that large of a group of volunteers together, dedicated volunteers to put that much effort and give that much time and pull all the different agencies together to see it all happen was incredible. It was incredible. Yeah, very fulfilling experience.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And on to your marine weather now, starting with the sea ice conditions here. We've got colder air moving into the Bering Strait as low pressure moves ashore into the west coast. With that and wind settling down, there may be some new ice forming where you are and across the Kotzebue Sound and Norton Sound regions look to be some of the more likely spots to fill in. But briefly, it does look like there will be another surge of warmer air moving northward as we head into the weekend, but then another round of colder air should come back in. So that ice change is going to be fairly frequent, and a good reminder to always check conditions carefully, especially near the shore, as ice conditions are changing pretty rapidly this time of the year. For the very latest information, as always, weather.gov/Anchorage/ice online. Here's a look at southeast now. We will have generally light winds on the inside passage as we go through your Thursday. 10 knots, 2-foot seas there in Stevens Passage, northwesterlies in Clarence Strait. Onshore push coming in from Yakutat all the way down toward the Dixon entrance. Around 20 knots or so should be expected. 7 to 8-foot seas there on Thursday. You can see that holds to about 5 to 6-foot seas on Friday. Southerlies pick up a little bit more in the Lynn Canal, and Stevens Passage goes southerly as well, 15 to 25 knots there, and 3 to 5-foot seas on the inside. Still looking at smaller seas and light winds there across Clarence Strait as we go through the end of the week. Inside Prince William Sound and northern Cook Inlet, light winds, small seas, 2 to 3 feet there. Tops, southeasterlies building across southern Cook Inlet, 4 to 5-foot seas there on a 15-knot wind, and south and westerlies are crossing the northern Gulf. About 20 knots there with 6 to 7-foot seas. Southerlies inside of Prince William Sound will shift to more of a southwesterly direction on Friday. Winds pick up a little bit more from the west as that front is crossing through the region, and following that, of course, 25 to 30 knots in the area with 8 to 10-foot seas in the northern Gulf, and about 5 to 8-foot seas there across most of Cook Inlet, a little bit lighter as you head up to the north. For Thursday in Bristol Bay, west and southwesterly winds are building in. 5-foot seas expected there across the Bering Strait or Bering Sea coast. 15 to 20 knots coming in across the north and western Gulf and into Kodiak Island. 20 knots on either side of the island. 5 to 7-foot seas there on Thursday. diminishing to about 5 to 6 foot seas as we get into your Friday, with 15 to 20 knot winds in all areas. Still looking at about 5 foot seas for the Bering Sea coast and Bristol Bay, and about 4 to 5 foot seas as you head down the Pacific coast of the Alaska Peninsula Friday. For the Aleutians, they're still getting off relatively easily, 15 to 20 knots there in the wake of a few weather systems. You can see another one shifting the winds just a little bit here between Adak and Kiska, 15 knots and about 5 to 6 foot seas there. 15 to 20 knots across the central and eastern chain, 4 to 7 foot seas on either side as we get into Friday. There's your weather. South and southeasterlies coming up across the west. You can see 35 knots in all areas and about 11 to 12 foot seas there. 6 to 9 foot seas across the central and eastern chain. And you're talking about 5 to about 11 foot seas from Unalaska Dutch Harbor to Nikolsky and all the way to the west toward Adak, a little bit higher there, especially south of Adak and Atka with that stronger southerly wind. Across the west coast, an east and northerly flow coming out of Norton Sound over the ice and St. Lawrence Island, a west and southwesterly flow working into the Yukon and Kuskokwim Delta regions, 25 to 30 knots there with a 7 and 8 foot sea. And westerlies crossing St. Paul and St. George, generally 15 knots with a 5 foot sea on Thursday, shifting to a little bit more of a southwesterly direction coming into the Kuskokwim Delta by Friday. West and southwesterlies working toward Hooper Bay, a 7 to 9 foot sea there, and southerlies coming into St. Lawrence Island and Norton Sound. And again, with the winds changing direction, we expect changes in the ice conditions there and eventually some new growth once that cools off and settles down just a little bit. Easterlies over the Beaufort Seacoast should be expected up to 30 knots. That will be blowing the snow around a little bit and probably reducing visibility. Winter weather advisories have been posted for the area. East and northeasterly winds coming off of the Chukchi Coast will wrap into Kotzebue Sound, becoming northwesterly there. 15 to 25 will do it up the Chukchi Coast, and northerlies coming through the Bering Strait, 25 knots and 4 foot seas. Reversing course on Friday, a southerly wind, 25 knots and 4 foot seas expected. Winds come up even more for the Beaufort, 30 to 35 from Kaktovik all the way to Utqiagvik. And the Chukchi Coast looking at an east and northeasterly wind about 20 to 25 knots for your Friday there. So be careful closer to the coast. Let's recap your weather tonight. Winter weather advisories continue for the central and eastern Beaufort Sea coast there, and new advisories have been issued for tomorrow night and into Friday for a large part of the interior as colder air is moving in, all ahead of this wet weather moving in from the west coast. Already rain and snow is expected for the Bering Strait communities and northern Bering Sea as we go through tonight. High pressure keeping things mild and dry for most of the eastern interior, but that will allow some rain to move into southeast as we head toward tomorrow night and into Friday. A front working through the interior will push a lot of warm and wet air into the region as we go through the daytime tomorrow. Things start as rain. Down below, about 1 to 2 inches of slushy wet snow may form by late Thursday night. By Friday, there's a chance that more locations will see accumulating snow, especially at higher terrain, from about 4 to 7 inches there. Have a good night.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.